So welcome everyone. We're excited to have you back for our last day with the Scholarly Writing Institute. And today's session is session 4 on analysis to writing. So we're excited always to have our partners, Dissertation by Design, working with us. And the owner and coach, Dr. Jessica Parker. We've been working with her for a couple years, and then with her team, which Dr. Veronica Richards is part of, and Dr. Richards will be doing the presentation today. And the first 2 presentations were with Dr. Desi Richter. So thank you, Veronica, for being here.
It's great to be here again. I'm excited for today.
And then the software experts, I'm going to be showing Citavi. My name's Stacy Penna. I'm the NVivo and Citavi Community Director here at QSR. And then my colleague, Laura Lagendijk, will be the NVivo expert, and she's a certified Platinum NVivo trainer. So thanks, Laura.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here on this 4th day, coming to you today from the foothills of the Rocky Mountains in southern Alberta, Canada.
And so for today's session, just quickly going over the agenda. So Veronica will start with the analysis to writing and best practices around writing. And then for NVivo will be next, and Laura will be showing you different ways to analyze an NVivo. And then I'll be showing how you can work with Citavi on analyzing your literature review, your secondary sources, and then how you can also use NVivo by exporting out to Word documents to then incorporate Citavi with that also. And then we'll take questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn over the reins to Veronica. Just give me a second.
Guess I have to turn on my mic. There we go. Thank you, Stacy. All right, everyone. Bridging from yesterday's presentation to today's, we're going to take our work in analysis and then see how we can use that work to inform our writing and make writing easy. So let's get going here. We have quite a bit to cover. If I can get my screen to move forward. There we go. Here's just a little bit about me, but for the sake of time, I just want to say that I've been working with students and researchers on their writing and research for going into 14 and 15 years now. And I love my job, whether it's in the university setting or in my work with Dissertation by Design, because I get to learn just as much, probably more, from everyone that I work with than they probably get from me. But so I'm very honored to be in this position and excited to work with you all here today. And I also want to mention we will be starting a analysis course at Dissertation by Design in July 14th, 21st, and 28th. It'll be a boot camp. If you go to our website, there will be more information on that if you're interested. Okay, so our learning objectives for today, we want to make sure how we can use or make sure that our findings that we have, so our themes, are aligned with our research design, and then to use visualizations of that design to help us make sure that it is aligned. And then to see how the structure of analysis helps determine a formula for writing. And this is what makes writing easy or easier for us when we move into the writing of the findings. And then understanding the difference between and the uses of external and internal writing structure. That's a big piece of our formula and a big piece of our success as writers. And then finally, we'll see how repetition of keywords and structure helps to produce a first draft of our findings. It's not a perfect draft, but it's a first draft. And that's what we want to get so that we can then build on it and refine it. We'll go ahead and do this poll then. what is your qualitative research design? This matters when we're looking at organizing for our writing in the findings section.
So it looks like we have 52% of people saying thematic analysis, 24% case study, 13% phenomenology or IPA, and 6% narrative, and 4% ethnography. So thank you for sharing.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you, everyone. I think this is pretty common when we are looking at our research design and moving into understanding how that impacts our chapter 4. You know, I really try to think about going forward. So in chapter 3 and even in chapter 1, the decisions that we make matter to our presentation in our findings chapter. So we're going to talk about these different designs and how we might structure them externally to then help us write. Alrighty. So this is probably the most common structure for, and it works for multiple designs.
Sorry, Veronica, for some reason it's cutting. We can't see everything.
Wow.
It's like your screen's too big. It worked yesterday.
Yeah. What if I do this? All right, so this is the basics structure for a thematic analysis, and this type of presentation can work for case studies. It can work for narrative studies, ethnographies. What comes in the topics and the patterns vary, okay? But this kind of gives you an overview of what to expect or what readers expect in chapter 4. As a methodologist and a chair, I often have people describe the setting more in depth now that the research has been completed in chapter 4 to set the background. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And if you are interested in some setting and participant resources, let Stacy know and I'll try to get that to you at the end when I'm finished with my presentation. And then we would describe the participants as a whole and individuals, and then go into the findings. I want to just pause a moment on the participants. In qualitative research, tables are just not enough. We want the reader to be able to get to know our participants so that they can then understand better the data that we will be presenting. And so that those individual, what I call profiles, are essential to our readers in their understanding of what we're presenting of the data. Okay. All right, so here's another structure that sometimes some universities require. So it's the same structure as before in this thematic way, but now we've organized it according to research question. So we had 5 themes in that last slide, and in this slide we have 5 themes, but this time we've organized them according to their relevance to the research questions. Sometimes this can be problematic because themes might cross over, but there are ways around that, and chairs and committees can help guide you through that process as well. All right. Now, if we're looking at case study can be different because we are looking at a bounded system. And so in this case, we still have a context setting section and participants, but this time we might have participants in groups. So there are different types of participants, and we would want to describe them according to their role, let's say, in the company. The themes then can be presented in a couple of different ways, and that's what I'm going to show you here in these next few slides. So this one's just similar to the common structure. just by theme. But if we look at this one, I'm still at a thematic, or excuse me, a single case study, but now I'm presenting data according to the participant's role: principal data, superintendent data, and trainer data. How you organize those data according to the participants depends on who are your primary participants. In this case, the primary participants were the principals. There were more of them. And then, as you might imagine, there was still only one superintendent per district and then one trainer. So that's why this organization took place. It could easily be other ways. If you wanted to go by order of, it would be superintendent, trainer, and then principal. That could work as well.
So sorry to interrupt again. The bottom part of the slide is cut off. Somebody said it's like you need to do the green, or maybe the presenter mode was just too magnified. I don't know. We can see like trainer data, but yeah, now we okay. I'll just let people know the information in the handout is not cut off. It's just that's what Veronica had. So don't worry about it. You're not missing anything.
Yeah, sorry everyone. All right, we'll go. Please just let me know if anything else happens and we'll fix it. All right, so next, if I'm looking at a single case study with embedded units of analysis, I might also organize it by principals as one unit, superintendents as another unit, and trainers as another unit of analysis, and I present their data separately. And the reason why I might do this is because I want to show how their perceptions, let's say, differ. And that's where this cross-case analysis then, I hope you can see it at the bottom of the slide, comes into play. So I just want to scroll back to the previous one. So you see here I'm presenting all the data in each theme for each participant type. But in this one, now I might have different themes in each embedded unit of analysis. I'm likely going to have themes that are common, but I might have some that are different. And that's why the cross-case analysis is now important and something that I would want to include. Okay. Now, if I have a multiple case study, so I have multiple organizations or multiple schools, then my findings might look something like this. I might have 3 different cases, and I present their data separately. So I would present case 1 as a whole, then case 2 as a whole, and then case 3 as a whole. And this is, each case would be similar to that common structure, all right? And similar to the last one with the embedded units of analysis. And by the way, for those of you who are conducting a case study, Yin uses this language of embedded units of analysis, and I will provide that reference for you if you need that as well. So because I'm looking and presenting the data separately, I will need to do this cross-case analysis, and that's where that comes into play for this design as well. And here's another example of multiple cases with embedded units of analysis. Remember, those embedded units of analysis would be the participants itself. So I present the thematic data separately for each school. Okay, so in this case, I have public schools and private schools. And then my embedded units of analysis are school A, school B for each. So I have a total of 4 schools in 2 settings. One's a public setting and one's a private setting. In narrative research, we can still do a thematic presentation, but the thematic presentation often centers around a story or plot structure in some cases. So we would have the situation and the phenomenon. We would describe that. According to all participants, we would describe the main characters with that participants mentioned in relationship to the phenomenon, then the rising action, turning point, and falling action. So in this case, our data is much more narrative. We are telling a story, but it's also based on, one could say, themes. Another way that we could do narrative research, and I think this is the way that I would prefer if I were guiding someone, because one of the reasons why we do narrative research is to highlight each participant's story. So in this case, it's almost like a case study. I'm presenting participant A's information, their story, and then participant B, and then participant C. And if I'm using Clandinin and Conley 2000 or Clandinin 2014 to guide my narrative work, I'm looking for continuity, interaction, and situation. For those of you interested in this, please let me know and I can give you some resources. All right, so how does our analysis structure and our design inform the writings of our findings? So we're really going to focus on that common structure and thematic analysis here. And we're going to look at the external structure first. So here's the analysis and our writing structure. So in our analysis, our first cycle analysis, identifying those segments of data that we talked about yesterday, the grouping in the second cycle analysis or pattern matching can then lead to determine our themes, identifying our themes, defining them, and cross-checking our data. From that analysis, we can now determine the order of our themes, inductive or deductive, it doesn't matter. And then in our writing structure, we include the definitions of our themes or categories, and then identifying the external and internal structure for each theme. We're really going to focus on that number 3 today. So number 2 for our poll here, how many people or how much experience have you had in writing up qualitative research findings? You've never written them up, you've done a small study, or you have written up a number of findings sections.
And share. And we have, interesting,
Wow.
It's pretty even. I know, 33% say I have never written up qualitative findings, 35% I wrote up a small study in my university coursework, 32% I have written up a number of findings sections.
Wow, I am impressed. This is something that I think is really lacking in sometimes in university settings, to where we just don't get enough experience. So I am happy to see that a big part of you, 2/3, have at least had some experience. That's great. So go ahead and move forward here. All right, so from yesterday, I presented a study on international students using a certain type of presentation format in their English for Academic Purposes courses. Yesterday I presented 5 themes, but for the sake of today, we're just going to focus on 3 and actually look at 1 in depth. So here's our overall thematic, let's say, findings, that we have 3 themes. So how does this help us write up our data? Let's see. So if I look at the research question, that's important, and then I determine my order. So I've determined that feeling emotions I want to put first, and then gaining awareness of cognitive processes I'm going to put second, and developing strategies will be third. And I've identified that logical organization for a specific reason, and eventually I'd want to tell my reader that. But for the sake of today, we're going to focus on how do we start presenting this information in writing, basically. So I could just say this: the data revealed 3 main themes: emotions, cognitive processes, and strategy use. Does it tell the reader how many themes I have? Yes. Does it tell them what the themes are? For the most part. But what's missing, I always ask myself these 2 things. Are the research question and topic covered? And am I using keywords from the themes and the research questions and topic? So here, the answer is no to each of these. I haven't included experiences of undergraduate international students, and I haven't repeated the presentation type, and I haven't been more explicit in the theme names. So let's see what that looks like in the structure first, and then we'll see what it looks like if I'm being more explicit with my language. So here's the structure. I have to have my phenomenon plus my research focus, then my themes presented in order that I'm going to present them in. I think one of the things that's easy to get mixed up sometimes is that I might put what I'm presenting last first, because I'm just trying to get it out there. So this type of structure will help make sure that what you tell the reader is what they are expecting. So if I present this theme 1, which is feeling emotions, first, as a reader, I'm expecting to see that theme presented first. So keep that in mind, that your reader does have these expectations. All right, so how does this look like in writing now? For the international undergraduate students in this study, their experiences with PK presentations included 3 main themes. Okay, this time I have included my research question and topic focus. That's good. Here's the end part. The 3 themes are feeling emotions, gaining awareness of cognitive processes, and developing presentation strategies. Now I'm being more complete in my language, and I'm using that order again. So remember, that order tells your reader what to expect, okay? And yes, I did use keywords in both aspects. All right, so this is what I would call your overall external thesis statement or guiding statement. This is the statement that guides the entire findings section, okay? I might say here, if my committee or my chair requires me to do a discussion at the end, and some universities do this, I might want to add another sentence here that says, following the presentation of the data within these themes, I will present a discussion section. And then that way I'm covering what I need to do for my chair and for my university. Okay, so here's another aspect of our external writing structure. So now I'm focusing only on the theme of feelings of emotions. Within that theme, I've identified 3 main topics that came out in the data, not that came out from literature, although it may have, and it did. And I believe that Stacy will kind of talk about how we can connect to the literature if we have to in chapter 4. Normally we do that in chapter 5. Not always, but mostly. So being overwhelmed, experiencing emotions due to being an international presenter, and then emotions related to public speaking. And I think we can all resonate with that feeling, right? So let's see now what this structure is. We have the theme, we have the 3 topic areas, and now we have our structure. It is the same as what we had before. The difference is we've added on the topics that we're going to cover. So topic 1, 2, and 3. Now, what does this look like in writing? So I've used colors here. I'm very much a visual person. So I've used colors to indicate what parts of the sentence structure allude to which part of the sentence. So let's see here. So the EAP undergraduate international student data related to the first theme of feeling emotions included the many emotions the participants experienced as they planned and presented their PK presentations during their EAP courses. Now, is this perfect? Absolutely not. I think I could be a lot more concise, but it doesn't matter. I'm not worried about that right now. I'm worried about just getting in the information. I can come back later, as Desi said the other day, in the revision process and tighten things up. All right, so let's see. Have I covered my questions? Have I addressed the research question and the topic? Yes, I have. Now, I can be specific about this theme and where I'm taking the reader. It's our job as writers to guide the reader through our understandings. And this is here the first and foremost part of doing that. So in this theme, the participants discussed feeling emotions due to being overwhelmed, and then I present the next two areas, being an international presenter and then public speaking. So I go back to my questions. Do I have my keywords? Yes, I do. Okay. So now, what does this look like if this external structure, if we put the pieces together, what does it look like? So for this guiding statement before that we talked about first, that thesis statement, it is first. It becomes my introduction to the themes. So for the international, blah, 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 feeling emotions, gaining awareness, blah, 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 okay? Then I go into my theme of feeling emotions, and I already have my mini thesis statement for this section. And here's what we just presented before using that structure. So I already have a very strong external structure here, based just using my outline from my analysis. Now, I believe that Laura will take us through and show how this looks in NVivo and how we can use that NVivo structure that's showing on our screen to also do this. So we can use by hand coding and analysis, or we can use those processes in NVivo to help us write. And I have my keywords and my guiding sentences. So, well, if you don't like the word thesis, these are really the guiding sentences that tell the reader where you're taking them. And these are critical to our writing. All right, so now let's look at the internal structure. And I know we're going fast here, but you'll have the video to rely on. And if you need anything, just let me know. All right, so that internal structure now we're getting into where the data is. Okay, so now we're going to focus on being overwhelmed. So we have that being overwhelmed topic. We're going to focus on that. Okay, now in the topic of being overwhelmed, I have two main points that came out in the data, that emerged in the data: overwhelmed with college demands and overwhelmed with the responsibilities of being a presenter. All right, so here is now the structure. So you can see the structure stays the same. I just keep adding on to what I have to include into that guiding sentence. So let's take a look at this one now. In the theme of feeling emotions, the EAP international students were overwhelmed during their undergraduate PK presentation experiences because of college demands and the responsibilities that come with being a presenter. I think I can already say I've answered all of my questions. I have my topic in there, address my research questions, and I'm repeating those keywords. Now, this repetition of keywords, while it might seem very redundant, is essential. For most qualitative findings, we're looking easy at 30 or more pages. I worked on a dissertation that had over 100 pages for their findings. Because of that magnitude, we have got to be organized and guide our reader. And this is how we do it. All right, so let's look at now presenting quotes within this. Our structure now focuses on theme, topic, point. I no longer have to talk about the research question or the topic as much, but as you'll see, I think I do end up mentioning it a little bit. But now I'm adding the quotes. So let's see here what I've done. So I've named the pseudonyms. I say they shared their experiences of feeling overwhelmed with the demands of college, which caused losing sleep, forgetting tasks, and realizing time management issues. And those are those nuances of meaning that come within my data. Yesterday, I mentioned that we are continuously analyzing our data, even into the writing. This is one of those points, that just because I have all my quotes in demands of college doesn't mean that I'm done. I still have to organize them according to topic, and these are those nuances of meaning, or main points, if you will. Okay. All right. So let's see if I've covered. I actually did cover my topic a little bit here with experiences, and I've used the keywords of the topics within the theme, and that's enough at this stage. Okay. Trying to move forward here, and it's stopping on me. All right. So now let's see how we can now bring in the data. So after this sentence, I would say Leah shared how her time management issues led to losing sleep. And then this is Leah's data and quote that's relevant. And then I show that similarly, Ian reported da 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 da. Okay, this is our job, is to show connections. If Ian's quote showed something different, I would make sure that I would say that. And here I've said it's similar, but he's talking about being tired and then upcoming quizzes and exams causing him to forget tasks. So see, I am showing a slight difference in what they're saying. All right, so how does this look? Look at everything that we've done here in this short amount of time, all based on structure. The one thing that I did not put in here that I want to just mention is that we never want to end on a quote, okay? We want to conclude this paragraph. If I'm done with this point, then I want to have a concluding sentence for this point that I'm talking about, as far as feelings of being overwhelmed causing them to lose sleep. So if this is about losing sleep or forget tasks or everything, then I want to kind of restate that at the end. Okay. All right. So you are constructing the not so perfect first draft. Nothing that I did there is perfect, and it will need me to go back in and tighten things up. But I've got all of that writing done. So remember, it's all about the structure, organizing our themes, our topics, and our main points. Remember the importance of our research design, importance of our analysis as it keeps going, and then repeating those keywords. And last but not least on this slide, using NVivo and Citavi to help us do these things. Making our case is our point. That's why we have to present the data, the quotes. In quantitative research, we present the tables showing the statistics. In qualitative research, we present the quotes. Sometimes we can paraphrase, but by and large, we're quoting our participants, or we're presenting our participants' quotes. And we're organizing their data and determining the amount of quote we're going to use and tightening it up if necessary. That's that cleaning up of data. It just continues all the way through to our writing. And then revising the not so perfect draft includes knowing your chair's preferences. Oh my goodness, I can't tell you how much this is critical for those of us in the dissertation process. If you are in the article writing process, you want to know the journal's preferences for whatever journal that you're submitting to. Very, very important to know ahead of time. Connecting the ideas and the quotes, that's your job, is to show the connections and the differences between them. And then we talked about these ideas as well, about repeating those keywords, the formula. And then be intentional about your word choice. This is really about that revision piece that Desi talked about the other day. We can go back and be picky later, but again, we're doing that not so perfect draft first. Use introductions and conclusions to themes and paragraphs. Use visuals and tables when necessary, and then strong verbs that convey meaning. And finally, I wanted to just present what a general, common presentation of the findings are. We have an introduction paragraph. Then we have a mini overview of the study that perhaps can allude back to the problem. Some universities do not require this, so definitely check your university template. And then looking at the context or settings section and description. And then the participant descriptions, presentation of findings, and then the summary of the chapter. And again, make sure that you are using all the resources from your university. You should be able to have access to your dissertation manual and template. Those are two things that will help you succeed. And then that is it. Thank you everyone for bearing with me on the technical issues.
Yeah, great, Veronica. A lot of positive statements, and I've sent you a few questions too to help answer. So thank you so much. And now I'm going to hand this over to Laura to show you doing analysis in NVivo.
Great, thank you. And just one instead. All right. Or maybe I'd just like to show my cute little guy. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be back today. Today, I am going to talk a little bit more about moving past the coding process in NVivo, although we showed you a bit about coding yesterday and got your feet wet in at least what are the options for coding in NVivo, and how you might move from beyond that simple coding to analysis and getting ready to write. And I often find when people come to me that they get caught in, they've coded everything in NVivo, they've got this list of codes, maybe they've done some organization, but they're not sure how to move past it and how NVivo actually supports the analysis beyond the coding. So today, to show you those things, I'm going to still be using the sample project, Environmental Change Down East, which I've mentioned before is built into every copy of NVivo, Windows or Mac. And I'm actually going to go in reverse order of my list. I'm going to talk about the queries, some of the queries you can use. I'll mention the framework matrix, and then I'm going to talk about how we export codes and memos, and I'll remind you a little bit about the code books and the importance of using those as well. So the resources I've included on today's slides are great little recordings that show you some of the ways to get started in NVivo, project setup, coding, and a bit more about cases and classifications. So you may be interested in checking those out. So let me switch over to NVivo, and I'm going to just come into the project. And this Environmental Change Down East project has lots and lots of coding built into it. It's what I would call an example of a mature project. So the analysis has been done. This is kind of what things look like when you're getting toward the end of your project. But let's say you're kind of at that middle stage that we spoke about yesterday, where you're looking for meaning across your data. You've got a fair amount of coding done, but now you're trying to do some of that theming, trying to get your head to the next stage of beginning to write up and gather some of the materials that Dr. Veronica spoke about in terms of being able to provide the evidence of how your themes developed and the quotes you might need to support those themes. So one of the tools that can be really helpful as you're moving from that straight coding into analysis are some of the query tools that are built into NVivo. And you can use queries at any time. They don't only just come at the end, but today I thought I would show you 3 that I find really helpful at most stages of the work. So I'm going into the query criteria here on the left-hand side, and I built in some queries, and some of these are already built into the project, so you can come into the sample project and rerun them yourself. So one of the most helpful queries when I'm just thinking about the data and some of the key topics and have I captured everything in the key topics that are really of importance to this work is a word frequency query. And if I click on this word frequency query that's built into the project, it says word frequency query in interviews, and that means the query is set up to look at the most frequently used words across all of my interviews. And when I run the word frequency query, it produces this list, and it actually puts the most frequently used words at the top, and then decreasing order of frequency from then on. Now, because this project is about environmental change down east, it may not be surprising to me that I'm seeing water, island, fish, etc. So when I'm using this toward the end of my coding process, I might be looking for words that surprise me at the top of the list. And am I actually making reference to those? Have I thought about where those words show up and what they represent in terms of the topics and themes in my data? So when I have a look at those, then I can also produce, I'm just going to the right-hand side of these query results, I can produce what's called a word cloud. And a word cloud is a visual representation of frequency. So that same list we just saw in Excel, or can be exported as Excel, but it's a kind of a list of words and frequency, can be exported as also a word cloud. And when it's finished showing here, I have found that the word cloud can also help me think about things a little bit differently. So in this word cloud, the words that are in orange represent the most frequently used words, and then the words that are bolded but out here a little bit to the edges are frequently used but not as much, and then decreasing order of frequency as you actually go through and look at the frequently used words. The word cloud, like most things in NVivo, can be exported. So just by right-clicking over it, export the word cloud, and it can be exported as a JPEG or a PNG file. And it can be used in some forms of reporting. Typically in academic reporting, we don't use this kind of visualization in, let's say, a dissertation, but it can be a helpful tool to interest your committee along the way in what you're seeing, or potentially to include on poster presentations about your work, that kind of thing. So another, I'm going back to the summary tab here, and another query that you can run is a text search query. And you'll see that there's a policy text query built over here in the sample project. But in a text search query, what we do is actually go back and forth, or what NVivo does is in the data that's selected, it actually looks for the words that you're looking for across a certain piece of text, across a code, across a folder full of your interviews, etc. Now, because I ran this word frequency query just on my interviews, I could look for some of these words just in the interviews simply by selecting the word. So let's say development is something that I thought was of interest in our topic and an answer to my research question, and I want to be sure that I've got every mention of the word development coded. I could come down here in this word frequency query list, right-click over that, and run a text search query for that word. Now it's going to run just across my interviews, and I can at a glance see where that interview word showed up. So I can see it showed up in Barbara's interview 5 times. In Dorothy's interview, she just uses that word once, and so on. You can see where it showed up in context. And then by clicking on the reference tab, I can jump into the section of those pieces of data and see where the interviews showed that word development. And I've even got other places that I could look afterwards. If I want to, I can go right back in and jump into the document itself and do a little bit more coding and looking for it. And I can gather up all of these results as a code all at once. So I could simply come up here, run and save the results, and put all of those words for development into one code all at once. So I use the word frequency query and the text search query kind of back and forth towards the end of my coding to start making sure, double checking that I've really got all of the references to some of the words that were showing up frequently coded for meaning. Now, just because the word development shows up a lot of times doesn't mean that's the only way. If development is one of the topics, it's not the only way that people will talk about development. So at some point, I may look to see another code that I've created already that has some ideas about development without using that word, and merge those two together. So you want both the word that's being used frequently, but if it's a key topic that you're finding in your data, you would also want to gather up all of the other ways that you've coded that idea of development, and you can merge those codes together. When you run a text search query, you can also produce what's called a word. I'm just trying to switch on it here. There it is going. A word tree. And the word tree is a little bit of a clue about what is happening with this word in the context of your data. So what you're seeing here is the reference to the word in the middle. And if I hover over it, it gives me a clue about where I was finding that. And then the other part of this word tree shows me words that are commonly used before that word development. So I can see impact is commonly used before, and words that are commonly used after that word. This, again, is a tool that I use in analysis to give me some clues about that word and where it's showing up, and have I got the ideas around that are often being used around that word coded or mentioned. Have I checked those out in my data? A word tree can be exported just like any other, most things in NVivo. You can export it and use it, but mostly I find this is just a good double checking analysis kind of tool. And when I've sometimes, just even before I've done coding, I might begin by doing a series of word frequency queries, let's say on certain interviews or other pieces of data that have been brought into my top project, and go back and forth between the word frequency query and the text search query and get a jump start on my coding. So you might use those tools at the beginning, you might use them at the end, but they can be very helpful for you to be driving your analysis. Potentially the visualizations can be part of your reporting, typically not in its scholarly writing, but it can help you think about your analysis in a different way. The other query that I wanted to show you while we're still in here is the matrix coding query. And this kind of query I find really helpful when we're starting to think about how certain topics fit together. Is there overlap? How is, for instance, in the query that I ran here, perhaps as I've been doing my coding, I've really been thinking that some people talk about some of my themes with different attitudes. So you may remember that there is, in this sample project, I'm just going to come back to my codes, there is this top level code called attitude, and we've got the types of attitudes coded here: mixed, negative, neutral, positive. And what I've done for this matrix coding query is put those codes, mixed, negative, neutral, positive, the types of attitudes, as the rows, and two of my theme codes, balance and community change, as columns. And what NVivo does when I run a matrix coding query is look for the intersection or the overlap between those codes. You can use matrix coding queries in other ways, but that's the one that I've run here. First, what's returned is this matrix that actually just shows me some numbers. So this number might represent, with negative attitude, there's one reference also coded to balance theme, and negative attitude, and 12 references coded to community change. So those numbers start to give me a little bit of a clue. Notice also that for positive attitude, I have only 6 references to community change. So when I run this kind of query, I'm starting to ask myself, given the work that I've done, the coding, is that making sense to me? Did I mostly hear about community change or read about community change, and people tended to have a negative attitude? So as long as it aligns with what I'm thinking, it may not drive me to further action, but especially if it doesn't, I may then start to wonder if I've sufficiently coded, and I might go back and look more for, well, I kind of think that people had a positive attitude, and I'm going to go back and look for that and make sure that we've got that coding done correctly. Now, even more helpful than just the numbers is that you're actually able to click in the cell and see the overlap of those two codes. So now I just clicked in the negative attitude and the community change theme, and I can come in here and begin to review all of the things that are coded at community change and coded at negative attitude. And this really begins to help me as I'm starting to think of my write-up. And when you think of the structure that Dr. Veronica shared, you're going to start thinking about how you're going to summarize what you saw people talking about with community change and the different representations of attitude. So I can also go back here, back to that matrix, and then look in the positive attitude and community change, and that will give me a clue as to what people were saying there. So this is a great way that you can start building some of those quotes that you might want to capture when you're trying to make your defense that most of the people talking about community change demonstrated a negative attitude toward it, and then you've got some key quotes here that you could pull out, or the positive attitude and community change, and you can do that. And in the matrix coding query, when you run it, you can actually save the results, and you can actually save those results as codes if you find that this is something that you really want to be reporting on. Now, the way that this matrix query was set up has the coding for overlap, and that, notice up here, the coding at rows, and it says and columns. And there's a little arrow down here that actually allows me to select different options. So I could also do some exploration of where things are coded at here but not coded there, or at here or coded there. So it's great to play around with some of those options as you're thinking about some of the comparisons between, in this case, attitudes and the various theme codes. So that's the 3 queries that I wanted to show you. There are more. I could show you those all day, but we're going to move on. And I wanted to show you then another way of summarizing data that is possible in NVivo for Windows. And as a reminder, I'm using the most recent version of NVivo for Windows. And what I'm showing you here is called a framework matrix. And if for those of you using NVivo for Mac, unfortunately, this part isn't in Mac, but I'll just show those who are using Windows quickly what a framework matrix can do. So if you've used a case structure in your project, which often in terms of interview data might be each person, it doesn't necessarily mean you're using a case study, but what you can do is have NVivo summarize things that have been coded at certain theme codes by the case, or in this example, the people, that are represented in each of our cases. So you'll see on this, I have the rows are each of my interviewees. And here has what's been coded about these themes for that person. So if I click on Charles's cell here, it shows me what I've coded from Charles's interview to community change. Now, of course, I can get that by going into the community change code, but one of the great things about the framework matrix is it allows you to do some side-by-side comparisons. So if I scroll down, you can see, for instance, that Thomas had something to say about community change and something to say about balance. And so I might be interested in what people are, if I think there's some kind of relationship between those two themes of balance and community change. And notice also that in this blue font, I have written my own comments. So one of the strengths of the framework matrix is I can come in and see the summary of that cell and add my own comments. And the framework matrix can be exported, right-click to export framework matrix. And I'll just show you what the framework matrix looks like when it's exported. You'll see an Excel spreadsheet, and then you'll see that I have deliberately put my own comments in a blue font, but what we were seeing in that matrix then gets exported as an Excel spreadsheet. And that can be really helpful to you as you're starting to think about the way people spoke about certain things and the summary of what they actually said, but your summary of what you think that means. So that's another tool that I wanted to show you if you're using NVivo for Windows. The framework matrix can be a great way of thinking about and summarizing some of the things that you're seeing in the data. Now I wanted to move on also to talking about codes, and yesterday we talked a little bit, someone asked me about exporting codes, and we're going to talk about that more today. And I also wanted to remind you of the importance of exporting the code book. So I've spoken about that a couple of times, and we demonstrated that by going up to the share ribbon, you can export a code book and then select which pieces of the coding folders that you want to export. And I've gone ahead and done that already because I wanted to kind of make the point again about how helpful it can be to export your code book at regular times throughout your analysis process. So coding and the analysis, as you're progressing, you're going to see this change in the code structure. And when you're doing it little by little, day by day, hour after hour, it's easy to think, oh, have I really made progress? Have I gotten anywhere? And it's harder to demonstrate that to your supervisor or your committee if you haven't been tracking and documenting the progress that you've been doing in this kind of way. But I wanted to show you yesterday's code books. Remember, we had kind of organized folders and we had inductive coding structure in different phases of what the codes could look like, and deductive and what the phases could look like. And for the purposes of today, I'm just going to demonstrate a little bit of what those code books look like from when we were using the inductive approach. So you'll remember I had just a big long list of codes with almost no hierarchy, no real structure beyond just that initial coding. I've got a few definitions in, lots of coding starting to happen, but not too much. So I would, if I was doing my analysis, export and save this code book as an example of what I started with in terms of initial codes. And then as I progress in my coding and analysis, I would also then get to, let's say, a middle stage of the coding. And now you're starting to see a little bit more structure, a few more definitions, definitely more coding. And just to orient you to the code book, what you're seeing here is the name of the code, the description, the number of files coded to it, and the number of references. If a code name is indented, that indicates a subcode or child code, which will eventually become the topics related to your themes. If you explain this kind of thing to your supervisor or committee, even if they're not familiar with using NVivo or don't use NVivo, you can export this codebook and share it with them as a Word document. And by the way, it becomes really handy to have these as you're beginning to think about reorganizing your structure, or you haven't worked in your project for a while and you can't remember what belongs where. Print off the codebook and use it to guide you in your coding. It's nice to have it printed beside you. And then we get to the final part of our code book. And now you can see I've got structure, I've got numbers, I've got lots of description. And then I can really use this to help me think about and guide my writing in the ways that Dr. Veronica said. Also, because I've got those code books saved, I am showing and having an audit trail that allow me to think about how the coding progressed when I'm writing that up for my methods section, but also to be able to demonstrate the rigor in which I did my research. Those code books are a piece of evidence, if you will, that I actually did the work and made progress and moved through. So a reminder of the code book and how it can be helpful to you both in the analysis, in the writing, and then demonstrating the value and the rigor with which you did your research. So let's go back to NVivo, and I wanted to also talk a little bit about ways that you can export codes or some of the tools associated with your codes and some of the structure of the codes. So the code book itself can be exported. I find that most helpful, but you can also export a list of your codes. And some people find that helpful, and that's how we used to do it in the old days before we had the code book feature. And to export a list, there's many ways, but I simply right-click and then export the list of codes. And if I do that, what happens is I get an Excel spreadsheet that looks kind of like this. And if I didn't know, you come open the plus signs and I can start to be able to see the structure of the codes. So sometimes people find this a helpful way of being able to think about and look at their codes as well. Again, it shows the number of files, the number of references. You could have other options showing there if they've been captured along the way as part of your process. So exporting the code book, exporting a list of codes, but how about if we wanted to actually export a code itself? And that is possible, and if you're using NVivo for Windows, there are multiple ways that you can export the code and its content. So if I select this code community change and I right-click and I export the code, you'll see that I get a window of options, and I could export the entire content, just the reference view, which gives me all of the stuff that's coded in that code, or a summary view, which just shows me a little bit of the number of documents, etc., that are encoded there. Also notice that I can choose to export the see also links or the annotations if I had used any of those in the code. And I can open it on export if I wanted. Now, the first example I want to show you is what happens if I export as an HTML file. This is a Windows feature. So I'll just show you that when I've got that, I can actually, I'm going to cancel out of here for a second and just double click on this. If I export a code in NVivo for Windows as an HTML file, you see you get on your folders a set of folders and instructions, clickable kind of links that allow you to open the code and all of the contents in a browser like Google Chrome. And anybody who has a browser, whether or not they have NVivo, could then take a look at your code and your contents. And you'll see that this presents a summary of the code. And by switching tabs, I can get an idea of what pieces of text are represented in there and the references. If I had picture files, those excerpts would come, audio, video, etc. So it gives you a very comprehensive look at what's been used in your code. And that might be helpful to you, especially if you're having discussions with your supervisor and they don't use NVivo. It might be a great way for you to show them everything that you've got in certain key codes, let's say. Now, it's a Windows feature only, but you can, and the next part I'm going to show you is available in both NVivo for Windows and NVivo for Mac, and that is exporting the code this time as a document. So for this option in Windows, I would select Reference View, and in NVivo for Mac, you simply select Export, and it gives you the option to export it as a Word document. And what happens when I do that, I'm not going to show you, but I do have it prepared, is to produce a list of all of the, it's just opening here, all of the references that are inside that code that are text files. Now this gets pretty overwhelming pretty quickly. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing it, but it is possible to do. But you can see that this isn't going to help you a whole lot when you're starting to do summary. But it is a possible option, not as helpful as some of the other tools that I've talked about, I find. So then also remember that we talked a lot about that process of memoing and tracking what you're thinking, both in an analysis journal or potentially in a memo that's linked to your code that allows you to track both your thoughts about the code and how it's developing, and potentially grab key quotes that represent that code along the way. So in my balance code, I can see that I've got a linked memo because of this little link feature. And if I right click, I can go down and open that linked memo. And in here, I've got this documentation of what I've been thinking about the code as it progresses. And remember that I can also, using this in Windows See Also links, I can also link to certain items in the text. And I love, love, love this part of the See Also links, that I can then say, here's a great quote representing the complexities of this topic of balance. And I link to the quote with a See Also link. And if I jump to it, it will actually take me into, I think, here we're going to go, into the text that I took the quote from if I wanted to be sure where it came from. It doesn't seem to want to open. Oh, there it is. So I can see a little bit more around it, and I can see by the highlighting that that quote came from there. But where this becomes helpful to me in my writing is that I can right-click over it to export the memo, and I can include my See Also links. And if I do that, what I end up with is a Word document that not only has my thoughts about that code, which represents a topic or potentially a theme, depending on which code it was linked to. And you'll notice that that piece that was highlighted in the code has a little reference number. I'm not sure if you can see it, but it does have a little reference number. And my quote is actually beneath it here. And it shows me the interview that it came from and the exact quote. So when Dr. Veronica spoke about summarizing the topic and the theme and then needing those quotes as evidence, I've got that built in right here. And by having it still linked to the data in my memo, I can then see whether or not the quotes that I choose to include in my dissertation or thesis write-up are representative across a range of my interviewees, or focused a little bit too much on only one of them, let's say. So by tracking that in a memo as I'm doing my analysis, I then have these documents that I can export. The memos can be exported as Word documents, which then allows me to have the basis for writing as I'm getting started on that final write-up phase. Now, those see also links are only possible in NVivo for Windows, but in the most recent version of NVivo for Mac, I've now kind of figured out a workaround that can be helpful to you if you're interested in also being able to kind of capture your thoughts about key quotes. And one of the things that I like to do always as I'm doing my analysis is create a code for memorable quotes. So that's what's been done in this project. As I'm reading and thinking, I'm coding, this quote really represents a certain thing. Then in that quotes code, as I'm coding, I can also add an annotation. And an annotation works kind of like comments in Word. And I can put in my annotation my thoughts about why this is such a great quote. And for Mac users, this is a great workaround for the See Also links. If you don't have See Also links available to you in the Mac version, because you don't have those, I would suggest creating a code for memorable quotes using the annotations feature to remind you of what you think this quote represents, because by the time I get to the end, I can no longer remember why I've got some of these in here. And then you can export that code and include the annotations. And if I do that, it produces a Word document that then allows me to have, we're going to cancel out of here and open that document. And it's going to be a list of all of the quotes that I thought were going to be great illustrations of certain themes. You'll notice there's some blue highlighting, and those correspond to my thoughts at the bottom here. So I think, Stacy, that's all I wanted to show. I wanted to remind people of the resource links, and hopefully this gives you some sense, folks, of how you move beyond that coding and starting to think about all of the other ways that you move beyond coding to do analysis and reporting and writing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. That was really, really helpful. I got great comments, and I shared some questions with you too. So lastly, we just want to talk about how Citavi comes into the analysis part of the writing. And so Veronica talked about using it for your external writing process. So that's really one place that Citavi is going to help you. Sort of with the review of the literature and how you're going to analyze what the experts are saying based on your topic. So I want to pick up this one. So what I did, this is the same project I worked with on Wednesday, but just for the heck of it, I added like the research questions here. So these might be my research questions on this project, looking at how creativity and, I spelled that wrong, boredom impacted people during the quarantine. And so like I had shown before, you can always add information to this outline. So really, Citavi is just a tool to help you organize what makes sense to you for your analysis and review. So again, just remind people I can go here and I can do a direct quote, an indirect quote, a summary, or a comment. And so here, maybe I'll do an indirect quote, and I can add this to a category. So maybe I'll add it to one of my research questions. And this is, again, where some of that analysis might come in, because you might be thinking about how this is going to impact on your research question, or what you're going to be writing about for your final project. So I'll just write something, and then I save it. And then you can see that it gets saved in the research question. Let me just open that up. So then with, sorry, I have a lot open. I just want to close that. So again, so you'd be using this for your secondary sources, Citavi. And then how this links with NVivo is, yesterday I showed how you can export it to NVivo, the whole project, and go to NVivo and go next, and you can bring in that Citavi project into NVivo. And then if I go to NVivo, I can do a couple things. So this is the same project Laura showed. And so I could import that Citavi project if I wanted to do more analysis. So somebody asked, do I use both products? And I would say, yes, they're complementary. So Citavi is going to help you manage all the references and organize and analyze those external sources, but also help you with the citation part of things. And then you can, if you want, under here, if I go to literature, I can bring in the Citavi project. And go and select the folder. And you can do all that same analysis that that Laura just showed you, you know, besides your own primary data, your own internal data, as Veronica talked about it, but also on the secondary or external data too, from the references that you're looking at for your lit review. So I won't show that to you because you just, Laura went into a lot of detail with it. But I also just want to show you what you can do if you, how you can use both together with the writing. So I had exported this, I've already exported this code to a Word document. So I'm just going to bring that up. So this is what it looks like in NVivo. It looks familiar to you. You have the information all here from the code that was exported. And then with Citavi, what's nice is I now can use Citavi for adding my references to this code and the parts of the outline that make sense. So if this code is answering one of my research questions, I can then go to the knowledge organizer and pick that information. So I just put one thing here, so I'm not going to have that much information, but I can go and pick the part in the code that makes sense for me, maybe to add either, maybe I want to add, I know I'm going to add something in regards to a reference here. So wait, let me bring that in, just double click. And it's now bringing in the citation style I want to, or I can add also parts of the outline. So maybe here I know this is going to be part of answering this research question. So I want to go here and I'll just right click and insert the category and knowledge item. So I don't want all the categories. I just want this current category and I want to include the knowledge items. So I can do that. And so it's bringing, so that was my research question. It's answering this part of the research question. And then it's even doing the citations. Or you could, if you don't want to do it one at a time, you could also, so get rid of that. I could also do what I did last time and bring in the whole, all categories, all knowledge items. So if I do that, it's going to do the whole outline for me. And then I could cut and paste what makes sense. So I don't want to start with a blank page here. So maybe this is a part where I want to add, I'll just cut and I'm going to add it to a section of my codes, or maybe I would do it in the opposite way, bring in what I have for the codes. So I'll do this. So again, it helps you really jumpstart your writing process. It's meant really to help you on all phases of the writing process that that Veronica showed you, but it also, so it helps with the pre-writing and then the analysis part of the writing and then the final draft too, because you have everything that you need right here. So it's nice that the Citavi add-in is now connects you to what you did in NVivo. And I just want to show you it's building that bibliography as you go. And you can always change the citation style. So I'm going to change it to APA. And so again, just makes everything life easier when you're writing. So I just wanted to show you how Citavi can help you with that analysis. So it's going to help you with the external, those secondary sources with analysis, bring it into NVivo to do more analysis, and then you can export that code or your Citavi outline to start helping you with the writing process. So with that, I'm going to go to the PowerPoint real quickly to just finish a few things up. So again, we have tons of resources here from Dissertation by Design, their services, again, helping you understand how Citavi and NVivo are complementary. They work together. So Citavi is all about the secondary sources, the lit review, and the writing process, and NVivo is around the qualitative data you're collecting and how to analyze that, and then you can bring them all together at the end when you're doing your writing. If you want to try Citavi, we have a 30-day trial. Please just go to the website and download that. We have for Citavi 6 is for Windows, and Citavi Web is for Windows or Mac. NVivo, the products that we have. So again, NVivo transcription, it's an added product, but integrates with NVivo desktop, NVivo collaboration, if you have a team, and then different learning journeys. Here's a link to different resources we have, both free and the NVivo Academy. And then I did put a link in the chat to the join the community, because then that allows us to let you know about more of these types of events that we're going to be hosting later this year or into next year. All right, I'll stop. And Veronica, any questions you want to address?
Yes. So I had a question of what about, or how do you describe your participants if you have a focus group of, say, like 35 participants total? In that case, when there are that many, I would definitely only present a group description and probably a few tables to show different aspects of the demographics or the group characteristics to make it visual as well as in my narrative for that section. And then, do I have time for one more?
Oh, sure. Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, great. This one was interesting, and I think it's very much worth thinking about. So if I have four sub-questions for a single case study or 4 questions, can I generate themes to answer each question individually and end up reporting 4 to 5 themes for each question? Or would this be too much? This is a great question. When, first of all, remember that our themes don't necessarily answer our research questions. They may address and be related to them, and they should be, but they're not direct answers. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I don't recommend splitting them up unless you are told to. If you have 4 research questions, depending on how much data you have, you will likely only have one theme that addresses each research question. If you do more than that, it's likely that you will be spreading your data too thin, and it will be harder to write that findings section. So I would recommend really just focusing on presenting the themes as a whole rather than by each research question.
Great, thank you. Laura, did you want to answer a question that you found would be valuable?
Yeah, I think so. I would like to, if I can share my screen again, the question is there a way to see or export what codes are used in each file? And the person was saying they know how to export the codes. So let me share my screen here and show screen. I want this one. Yep. You seeing NVivo?
Yes.
Thank you. So let's say, so the question is about how to see what codes are coding certain files. And there's a number of ways that you can do that pretty easily in NVivo. So I'm just selecting Barbara's. Barbara's interview has lots of coding. It might be a bit overwhelming, but I'm gonna do, let me see one that has a little bit less. We'll go to no, Betty and Paul's is this one. I'm going to come down to William's interview. And by just selecting this interview, notice that it's got lots of codes and references. I can right click over that and visualize, and there's a number of things you can do here. So one of the things I like is this explore diagram. It's right down at the bottom, the way that this window opened. And the explore diagram presents a visual of all of the codes, all of the codes that are coding on William's interview. So of course, this is going to be a little bit overwhelming. Let's take off the cases that he's got coded. Let's take off the relationships and the memo links. I'm using the ribbon that opened up. And now this starts to show me just the codes that have been coding his interview. And I can actually move these around and group them in certain ways. And of course, I can make it bigger. And you can export this, guess how, right click, export that diagram. So that's one way of getting a visual, and you can move these around to be grouped. So notice that question 1, question 2, question 3, you could have showing up here. And I can actually even come in here and change the focus if I wanted onto just question 1. So that explore diagram can be very cool. I would encourage you to watch Stuart's visualizations webinar that I referenced a couple of days ago. So that's one way to take a look at what's been coded. You can also come down and chart some of the coding, and that charting will then show you a number of the most frequently used codes, and you can switch the display of the chart by coming up here and also what's being shown in the chart, etc. So that's another way to look at it. And another thing, and of course the chart can be exported. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is you can do a word cloud. Remember I showed that before. If I wanted to show the most frequently used words in William's interview or in a code, I can right click and just produce that from here. So that's what I wanted to show. Thanks, Stacy.
No problem, Laura. And I had just questions from people about the integration with Citavi and NVivo, and you can see the many possibilities by just seeing both of the softwares together. So right now, the only integration is when you export a Citavi project that you can import into NVivo, but we are working on more integrations because it makes a lot of sense. So just stay tuned. Our development team, is looking into that. And I just want to again thank everyone for joining us, and especially our excellent presenters, Laura and Veronica. Thanks so much and Desi for the first 2 days for being with me today and this week.
Thank you so much. It was awesome to be here. Thank you everyone for being present and asking such great questions.
Yes, thanks everyone. I really enjoyed this series. Thanks so much for attending.
Thanks all. Have a great rest of your week and a great weekend. Bye.
Bye everyone.